Hello, everyone, and welcome to Goal Chat Live. I'm Debra Eckerling, author of Your Goal Guide, a roadmap for setting, planning, and achieving your goals, and founder of the DEB Method, which is my system for goal setting simplified. And Goal Chat Live is my weekly conversation to dive deeper into a goal chat topic. So every Sunday night, I host Goal Chat on Twitter, and then Monday, I bring in a special guest, usually a cool person, friend, or someone I've always wanted to meet. Actually, this is cool person and friend. So we got the first two there to dive deeper into the topic. And in April, our theme is storytelling. So last week, we talked about live streaming. So the natural progression is to talk about podcasting. And I am so excited for my guest today. Michelle Elise Abraham is one of the founders of my podcast coach. And she's just awesome. And I'm sure you can, and host of AmplifYOU podcast and a bunch of other cool things, podcast producer, and all around cool person. So I'm sure you can introduce yourself a little bit better. So why don't you go ahead and thank you so much, Elise, Michelle, for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks, Deborah, for having me. It's been nice. You were on my show a few weeks ago, so it's so nice to be on your show now. So yes, I have a company called AmplifYOU where we help people launch and manage their podcasts so they can stick in their zone of content creation, their zone of genius, so they can just record the episode and we'll do the rest. And then my podcast coach, founder, and I, Evans, we really help podcasts get to the next level through monetization and really optimizing your show.
And you have this, I'll mention it more later, but we're talking about introducing you, so you have a little gift. I know we're supposed to do that at the end, but why would I do anything traditionally? So you can go to the link in the chat and what is this podcast toolkit? What is in there?
Yeah, so it's actually a full membership with tons of training, all things to do with podcasting. So whether it's like how to create great Canva artwork or how to, how to land your first guest on your show, all those kinds of things, lots of great content and training in there. And it's a free membership area.
Oh, well, aren't you guys awesome? And we met because you host a Friday meetup, which connects podcast hosts with podcast guests. And I kind of like skirt the line a little bit because I do my live show. And if you haven't heard, my podcast is coming back. Blame it on the influence of cool people like Michelle and Evans and just the universe in general. And also, so I do the live show, but it's content that can be put in a podcast format as well. So that's kind of, I'm going to play around with it. I don't want to spoil too much. I'm just going to say I'm totally excited. But before we jump in, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your journey and how you became this, podcast whisperer?
Sure, yeah, I can become the podcast whisperer. That's awesome. Well, I was actually a new mom. I found myself being a new mom after I'd had a really successful fitness business and a location and several locations actually and lots of staff. And I found myself at home with a new baby going, my business brain is gone to mush. And so I remember turning on the Apple TV and I was like, what's that purple thing on the Apple TV? I want to see what's on there. So I turned it on and sure enough, there was Eventual Millionaire by Jamie Tardy and Online Marketing Made Easy by Amy Porterfield was just starting with brand new shows then. And I was like, oh, this is back in 2012, by the way, way before most people knew anything about what podcasting was because I turned to my mom friends, what shows are you listening to? What are you talking about? And so I found myself listening to this podcast and I was getting motivated. I put my earbuds on and take my son for a walk. And I felt like I could be learning while still being a great mom and being present and playing on the floor or going for a drive. We could be learning things. And, so I became an avid listener and I'd wait every Monday morning for that show to drop. And I remember as a listener, if that show didn't drop on a Monday morning, I'd be pretty disappointed. So I always like to say now, like several years later, that podcasting, I think, probably saved me from postpartum depression as a listener. And then I saw this medium as something that nobody knew what I was talking about, but it was in my car. It was on my iPhone. It was on my Apple TV. It was already in places that I was already going to. So I thought this cannot go anywhere but up from here. I'm sure this is just something that's ahead of its time at the moment. And I'm sure it's going to get super popular. as it has. I mean, even 10 years later, I'd say it's still only in its infancy stages just now.
Oh, and it's fun, right?
It is. My clients say it's their most favorite thing that they do in their business each week, and I agree. It's my most favorite thing to do too.
Well, one of the things that I love about it, and so I hosted the Guided Goals podcast from 2015 to 2016, and then I really wanted to get my blogging book out, and I couldn't do everything, so I'm like, okay, season 1, put a pin in it, work on other things. So I've had 2 books come out since then, the self-published, and then Your Goal Guide, which came out just over a year ago, and now and this live show's been going for about a year. So it's am I a content junkie or what? What is the pull of a podcast? And if you are listening and you are a podcaster or you love podcasting or whatever, please feel free to share in the comments your podcast story.
Mm-hmm. I remember as a listener, I'd be like, I felt like I could go up and give those hosts like a huge hug if I saw them at a conference or something, because I felt like I knew them so well, right? So it really allows you to build that like trust with your listeners, and they get to know you really well. And, it makes for a very easy segue into your business. I mean, most of the 99% of the podcasters we work with are podcasters that are in, they're entrepreneurs. They're in it to work on their own business. They want to see a return on their investment in their own time and everything. And so they're not out there like looking for the millions of downloads and the gangbuster ads and all that kind of stuff. They're more like looking for it as like a really great tool to add into the ecosystem of their business.
And it's fun because it's also sort of like it's like a free pass to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the other benefits of podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things is that it actually is like you're part of the media. So you get a media pass where you can like actually reach out and have a conversation with people who you wouldn't necessarily normally be able to reach out and have a conversation with. So it's those before and after the recording conversations that move the needle on a lot of relationships. And so it's a great relationship building tool, I think. Not only is it great for your visibility, it's great for positioning yourself as an expert, but it's those relationships that you're building while you're being the expert or going out there and interviewing other experts, I think is invaluable.
And so do you have like a favorite story of a person that you met through a podcast, or like a top 3? You probably have like dozens, but can you give a good example of that sort of situation for you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So many cool things. I mean, one of my favorite clients, Hillary DeCaesar, she was on the show Secret Millionaire, and she's got people on her podcast now like John Asroff and John Gray, and like some amazing people. And what she's really doing in her show, she came to me and was like, I want to do this as invulnerable as possible, and I want to do this in front of my whole audience. I was like, okay, well, that's something different. And so what we did is we went live every single day in a Facebook group of her clients, and she was super vulnerable. I coached her through the whole process, and in 21 days, she had a podcast, and she's just going on celebrating her first year anniversary, and they went on the show as the first year anniversary. But that was really a cool experience and a really cool relationship that we started from doing those lives all together. Now we've continued on into other aspects of business, and I've become a client of hers, and she's referred other clients to us, and it was the beginning of a great relationship. And that's just one of my millions of examples of really cool people you get to meet when you're podcasting.
Okay, so it's about just meeting. It's just an intro to meet new people who could become clients or could refer clients and whatever. And you know this about me, and anybody who's heard me talk in any kind of conversation knows this, is networking really is the key to expanding your business, but also reaching your goals, because you can't achieve your goals alone. And what you're saying is podcasting is like a huge cog into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a great relationship building tool. And one of my favorite things about it is that you get to lead with service first. So you get to say, hey, Debra, I want to get to know you better. I want to invite you on my podcast. So maybe I don't know you that well, and I want to find out, maybe we have some potential collaborations, so we have similar kind of audiences. Want to get to know you better, so I invite you on my podcast to get to know you better. And I think that's one of the greatest things, because you get to lead first instead of being like, can I please be on your podcast? That kind of thing. I think it's a much nicer way for me. Anyways, I love doing it where I get to serve first and offer first.
And so it's the invitation. So look at people who you feel some sort of connection with, mm-hmm. that you want to develop a relationship with for whatever reason, and see where it goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, I always think of the podcast as like the beginning of the relationship, and think about all those coffee dates you used to go on. Well, people don't have time for no matter that we can't actually meet in person anymore either, but like you can't do those coffee dates as much anymore. So this is a really good opportunity. And think of people who have something coming out in the world, like Debra, when your books were launching, you'd be a perfect person to reach out to go on a podcast, or, when you have something big coming up, or you have something, if I remember one of my first podcasting experiences as a media person was I got to live podcast in the back of a social media conference with hundreds and hundreds of people. But every person that came off stage, I got to interview on my podcast. So there was no other way I would have gone in for free to a conference like that, got to be a media person, and then got to interview every one of those speakers from stage from my podcast. Like, that was a really cool opportunity that came from podcasting.
I love that. And I also love the whole, a podcast can be anything. So your client / friend / whatever, she went live for, you said 3 weeks, and from that she created a podcast. I'm talking about repackaging my lives into a podcast, which is going to be similar, but not the same. What are some other creative ways to create podcast material?
Yes, especially those authors out there that are sitting on gold mines of content. You can start reading parts of your chapters of your book and turn that into a podcast. You can also start using the frequently asked questions that you get from clients, customers, patients, whatever kind of industry you're in. Think about what people are asking you all the time, and turning those into great content. And in the parenting space, there's a parenting podcast by Amy Lang, and it's called The Birds and the Bees and Kids. And what she's done is she's gotten parents to call into this number and ask their most embarrassing questions. So then she plays those questions on her podcast and answers them live then. So it's just like an old school radio show where you call into, but it's all pre-recorded, and it's such a cool way of doing that. I think that was a pretty interesting way. So the cool thing about podcasting is that right now, the world's your oyster, that it's open for creativity. There is so many interesting different ways that you can do things. And there's so many different kinds of content that you could talk about that I think makes it something that's available to everyone.
And one of the things that we talked about when we were deciding on what we were, well, obviously it was going to be podcasting because it is you, is you have a whole system of podcasting and productivity. And, I hear the word productivity and I'm like, productivity, tell me more. So please tell me more.
Yeah, so we have a whole system where we help our podcasters manage their show in a systematized way, so that really all they have to do is record. And then we have the plan set up so that their content gets created, it gets edited, it gets published, it gets syndicated out, and it gets put back into the world how it should be. So we have that whole systematized in a really, really great way. But I think one of the most efficient ways of looking at podcasting. So that's the management once the show is already going. And I think one of the things that I see people stopping themselves from doing a podcast is the thought that it's going to take so much more time. And it's like, oh, another social media channel that we have to do, Debra. Like, really, do we have to do this social media channel like TikTok and all the others that we got going on, and now Clubhouse and everything? Like, it's overwhelming, right? So actually, if we think about podcasting, and this is where the productivity hack comes in, and we think about podcasting as the hub for all of your content for a whole month, and you start with a couple of hours sitting down, recording some episodes at the beginning of the month, then you can turn those episodes and utilize them in so many different ways, and cutting pieces out of them in blog posts and transcripts and all sorts of things, especially if you start with video. first. And, that covers a lot of your social media. It covers a lot of your content for the entire month that you really don't need to worry about it. And then after you get going a few months down the road, don't forget, now you have all these older episodes that you can also bring back up and repurpose again. Even though they're a few months old, maybe somebody missed them. So bringing back up those old episodes again. So now you have this productivity hack that's getting your content for the entire month done using podcasting, and then syndicating it out to all the other platforms.
Wow. So evergreen content then is better, right? Or not really, because sometimes you want to be trendy. So how do you walk that line between what's for now? I'll use me as an example. So because here we are. So my theme for March was empowerment. And because that was my theme, that was a thread through all my different Facebook Lives. So from my empowerment party at the beginning of the month to the specific topics throughout the month. So how do I keep my theme but still be evergreen?
I think that having a theme is great. I think that's not a problem. You can have that theme going through the month. I think where it gets tricky is if we start talking about current events in our podcasts, because podcasts are so evergreen. So if someone's coming back and listening to that podcast a year from now, I was very apprehensive about talking about the pandemic at first, because I was like, I don't know how long this thing's going to last. And people want to come back and listen to it in a year, and, we're talking about this thing. So, I think current events are tricky. And if you want to keep your podcast as evergreen as possible, because you're going to get longevity out of it. So if there was something that you're mentioning that, I don't know, some major current events that's going on that you don't want it there in a couple of years from now, you might want to look at taking those back down after a while. But, for the most part, having a theme, I think, is great. I think that's a great idea. And having people connected to those themes is also awesome. Having your guests connect to those themes, that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. It's just that current event stuff that kind of makes it less evergreen sometimes.
So let me ask you this. Would it make sense for me as a strategy then to publish my April shows as a podcast in May? So work ahead. So I create my content in April, and then it is new podcast content in May.
Yeah, I think that works good, because you have to remember, people are probably, as much as they love us, not going to listen to us on a live and read about it and also look at it on social media. And even if they do, they're probably not going to remember that same content. And again, they probably need to hear that content several times anyway. So I think if you're worried about people recognizing that same content from the month before on the lives in a podcast, I say don't worry about it. That's totally fine. You're not going to have any sort of problems with that.
Okay, and does it make more sense to wait and do it the next month, or to rush and try and get it out the same week in a different content format?
I would say I don't rush. I say just put it out at a speed that you can keep consistent with it over long term. So podcasting is a long-term game, with the strategy of return on your investment is a little bit of a longer-term game as well. And you're going to see those months where your download numbers are going to start to double and then double and then double. And those are amazing months. But so I think back to your question around content, I think the content, whether you do it sped up right in that week that you do the live, that next week you publish the podcast, I don't think it matters as much as if you take it out the next month. You'll probably actually get longer run out of that content if people haven't heard it for a month and then they hear it again.
Ooh, okay. So it works to my productivity strategy, and also for viewership, because the other thing that I saw is I looked at my numbers for the first time in a while as I'm preparing, and I still have downloads, like recent ones. I got a review as recently as last year, which I thought was pretty awesome for a podcast that's been on hiatus since 2016. So talk a little bit more about the longevity aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually lucky that it's still there. And I guess that you're getting listeners to that show still, so then Apple's not taking it down. Because for a while there, they were taking down all the inactive shows that are out there. And what the new statistic is that there's over 2.1 million shows live, but there's actually only 700,000 shows with more than 3 episodes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I have 41.
Yeah,
And
you got a
so
lot of
I'm like bucking the system without even trying,
Yeah,
which
no, I
I
think
love.
that's great. I had my friend Scott. He did a real weight loss podcast back in 2000, and he was still getting 20 years later people emailing him, thanking him for his show and like how much it changed his life and stuff. So, I think if as long as Apple doesn't take it down, I think that's fantastic. If you want to really make sure Apple doesn't take it down, put it somewhere else too, so it's still connected to a website or keep sending traffic there, or add in a new episode every couple of months, and then it looks more current, right? So I think that's also another strategy there.
Well, and that's a wonderful question, which goes to, and I asked this in the group, so let everybody else benefit from your knowledge. I'm relaunching my podcast. I want to keep the same feed, but I want to rebrand. So what do I need to do that?
Yeah, it's a perfect segue for a new season, is that I like to say. So sometimes we go into podcasting thinking that it's very strict and not, I can be fluid. I like to say podcasting is fluid because it is going to change over time, which is why we're seeing shows pod fade at 12 episodes, because that's perfect time for a new season when you kind of want to change something usually, right? So take that as a sign, as like, yes, it's perfect timing for a new season. So keeping that same feed that you have, you can change your artwork, you can change your title, you can change the episodes, you can even change the whole content itself, but at least you still have that feed that's been there for a while. So I think that's perfectly fine to do that. And we have clients that change their cover art and the name of the show every season.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So the feed stays the same. Now, what about the slug? Does the slug change, or does that
So
stay
it can never
consistent?
change. No,
Okay,
stays the
well,
same.
so I think me having a slug that's guided goals forever just ties back into the overarching everything of me. So I'm feeling like it's going to be win-win that I can't change it. So that part's
Yeah,
good.
totally.
And so for starting new seasons, do you just renumber them, or do you start with the 2 in front of the numbers? What is the trick for
Yeah,
seasons?
there's a couple of different things that you can do. You can just start with like, you can do like the S2 EP1 if you want to do that. You can have that number in it. But what I like to say is that the part where you have like the title on iTunes is very highly sought after real estate. So you kind of want to actually do the title and some more keywords and stuff first, and then do the numbers at the end of it. So they're not getting in the way of the good real estate space there.
Oh, so for example, so your podcast starts with AmplifYOU, talks to whomever?
Yes. So no, my podcast does not have that until the end, because it's going to be either something that I want people. So for my particular show, it's a little bit different because I have 2 different kinds of shows. So I do Ask the Expert, and then I have their name and some stuff about them, and then the number of the show. Or I'll have Behind the Mic, so people can just differentiate between those 2 types of shows. But how did I not have those 2 different types of shows? I take those out all completely and just have a title with a lot of keywords, as much keywords as possible for that content in there, because that's a really, really highly sought after real estate space.
So in the keyword rich content that goes in the title and in the description?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, so what are other little podcasting hacks for getting the most out of your podcast to get it the most visible? Because yes, it's great for client development, but some people just want to talk and they want to be found. So what can people do for that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would start, first of all, my number one strategy, and some people, it's funny, it's one of these strategies that some people are like totally on board with this. Some people are like, no, what are you doing? But
I
I
love it already.
personally like going and getting another podcast as a strategy for growing your own show. And that is something that I feel passionate about, because it's actually coming back to the reason I'm doing my podcast, and that's for networking and building relationships anyways. So it's one of the activities I value as an organic outreach that's going to grow my show. So somebody who's maybe got a show that has tons of ads in it and it's just for, it's more so like they're making a business out of their podcast rather than introducing their podcast to their business, then that's maybe not the strategy for them getting on more shows, or like a sports specific show or a hobby specific kind of show. Whereas I'm talking about more entrepreneurial kind of shows, kind of like with the shows that we have. That's getting on other shows is a great strategy. and coming to events like we have the Podcasters Connect and Collaborate, where you can meet other podcasters and get on other shows and work on trading podcasts time for on each other's shows is, I think, a great strategy. And you get to meet new people and have a lot of fun while you're doing it too.
Wonderful. And I think I'm going to blame your show for pushing me over the edge, because at the beginning of lockdown, I was all set to start a new podcast, and then my publisher said, "Hey, do you want to do a Goal Chat live show?" And for me, that felt like more of a fit at the time. And as you know, I'm sure, when you're doing content or creating anything, you want it to be in line with your mission. So mine is Goal Setting Simplified. So that worked well for me. And now I'm like itching to expand. One of my goals is I like to do like 4 launches, 4 fun little things every year, because that way I can figure out what they are. I achieve my goals by knowing that I want to do specific actions, but I let the actions evolve. So I think that's, for me, it's like, okay, the timing, and then get pushed a little bit over the edge by going to your Podcasters Connect and Collaborate thing. And what always fascinates me is every now and then I will get an email from someone, "Hey Deb, do you want to be on my show?" And I've done nothing, and I'm not complaining, but so how do people find guests other than going to your wonderful Mixer, Mingle, awesome Friday thing?
Yeah, I would go and see what shows are similar to yours on iTunes and see what guests they have on, and then see if you know any of those people. I would always start with your inner circle and start with people that you know first that do podcasting, see who you can connect with. And then if you've been on any other shows, reach out to those people whose shows you've been on and say, "Hey, can you think of anyone else that would be a great guest for my show?" Just use your network and see where you can get, how far you can get. And then there's tons of podcasting groups. And then I have a few favorite podcasting places. One is Podcasters Guest Directory is good. Andrew Allman puts out a daily or weekly newsletter where he showcases 6 or 7 different podcasts that are accepting guests. He also showcases a bunch of guests on his show. I like podbooker.com, I think is great, or match.fm. Those are also great to find some shows in there. And then podit.net is another one of my favorite ones.
I hope I spelled them all correctly. I think,
and if you don't, no worries, because in the Podcasters Toolkit, there is a PDF in there that's got all of them in there.
Well, even better. So I will definitely put the link to the Podcasters Toolkit as well as the one to join your group, because even there, it's, you have a question, you can ask the question, and I know that you and Evans are just completely on it in terms of being responsive, which is great. All right, so let's dial it back a little bit, because I do want to get through the rest of the Goal Chat Live questions, or the Goal Chat questions. And so the next one is, what advice do you have for someone starting a podcast? I mean, we talked about the different formats, but can you nuts and bolts it? I know it's like longer than like a 2-minute answer, but what is the first step? How does someone get started?
Yeah, I think it's actually an easy answer. I think if you have this inclination to do it, and like there's a reason that keeps like coming up for you, right? Do it. Take the time to do it, but take the time to figure out what you want to talk about first. And this is something that I struggled with for like 4 years, probably. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to talk about, because I kept coming back to talking about podcasting. I'm like, no, that can't be what I want to talk about. I'm like, I want to do a podcast. I don't want to talk about podcasting. But it turned out that's what I wanted to talk about. So do a little bit of soul searching. Find out what you can't stop talking about is usually a good sign. What do people ask you about? And what are the most frequently asked questions people are always picking your brain about? That's usually a good sign that that's some of that content. Also, are you excited to talk about it? Those are some things that are good signs that those make good topics, and that's when you kind of know you're ready to start one.
And I can I can just elaborate a little bit. You can like DEB Method it, right? Determine the mission for your podcast, explore your options, what kind of show you want, what format, what frequency, brainstorm your path, write down everything you need to do, make a plan, and do it.
Exactly. Love it.
So there's that. I think that's what I talked about when I was a guest on your show.
You did, yeah. No, I love it. It's good because it fits exactly what we do with our clients. So your DEB method works perfectly.
Well, but it's really for anything. Any endeavor that you're looking to go into, in one of the goal paths in my book is become a known expert. And that's the bucket that I use for write a book, start a podcast, write a screenplay, do speaking, just anything that you need to do that if you want to get yourself out there, you need to look at what your options are, explore what makes sense for you, and then make a plan so you're successful. So what is the second thing people need to do to start a podcast? Because I think people get really, really, they get caught up in the details.
Yeah. I see there's 4 things that stop people from launching a podcast. And I think the next step has to do with all 4 of these things. And so those are 1, get to know your technology. Is not fearful. You do not need a whole table full of technology. All you need is a microphone and a computer. And so, realizing that technology is not so scary. Number 2 is getting over your fear of being seen and heard. Because a lot of our podcasters are the best kept secrets out there. And now is your time to step up and share your message with the world. So getting over that, it requires you to get into action. So getting over your fear of being seen and heard, getting over the fear of technology, realizing it doesn't take as much time as you thought that it's going to take. So by using that productivity hack that we talked about earlier and bashing all your content at the beginning of the month, it's going to save you a ton of time. And the last one is analysis paralysis. So people get into this analysis paralysis of they didn't do the DEB method properly, Deb. They are overthinking it, and they just can't get into action because it's not perfect. So putting your podcast out there when it's not perfect is how you should do it, because if you're not embarrassed by your first few episodes a year in, then you waited too long to do it. So that's kind of our thoughts on those. Getting into action, just start doing, break it down. And like I said, like using your goal method is the perfect way of breaking down all those things that you need to do to put together a podcast into small pieces that feel more realistic and less of a huge chunk, more of a bite-sized piece, and feel like they're more of a easily consumable.
I think I caught everything.
You did great catching that.
Well, this way, I want to be able to, because I do put up the recaps tomorrow, which is on the debmethod.com/blog. But I also like to have the notes in the chat or in the conversation, so people who are listening need to know stuff, they have it and it's out there for them. But I also want to be able to put the best nuggets in there. So I want to digress a little bit, and then we will wrap up. So these are tips to get people to start a podcast. What recommendations do you have for people who want to be guests on a podcast?
Awesome.
Do the things you said before?
Those are pretty similar. Yeah, they're pretty similar, except for they require just a little bit less work to get yourself out there as a guest rather than a podcaster. A little bit less in the preparation stage, which is good. But still, what you want to do is we call something called the get noticed formula. So we want you to go out there and get noticed. So if there's a particular show that you want to go on, go first of all, listen to it, make sure it fits with what you want to talk about. Then make sure they have the same sort of audience that you would like to speak to. Then I would make sure you subscribe or follow and review the show. Give them a review, because podcasters are always watching those reviews. So they're going to see your name pop up there and be like, oh, that's awesome. I got a review from Debra. And then when Debra's name pops up on social media later, as now you're following them on social media and commenting or engaging, they'll be like, oh, that was the Debra that gave us a really awesome review. So then when your email comes through saying, hey, I love your show. This is what I really like about it. I noticed you love Black Labs. Me too. This is a picture of mine. And I noticed on your last episode, you talked to someone about podcasting where she talks about how to launch a show. Well, I think a perfect segue, it would be how to monetize the show. And this is what I can offer you, blah, 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 blah. And I think that would be great. If you're interested, let me know. Here's a little bit more about me. And so then you're leading with what is it about their show? Think their audience would enjoy it. You've listened to their show. You found some common ground with them. And that's all part of the Get Noticed formula.
I love that. So you'll see I typed this one fast too. So to be a good guest, you use the Get Noticed formula. I love it. It's perfect. And goal setting simplified. I'm all about saying what you mean. So find a podcast, listen to it, write a review, and then email something very specific to the show. So it shows that you're a fan. And I don't think, I think there's probably like a balance, because you want to be like, oh, I love your show, but you also want to come off as, I love your show for this reason, and I think I'd make the perfect guest because of this. So you're showing that you listened and you know them, but also how you add value to them.
Yeah, showing how you can add value to them is huge, because if I go on something like Podbooker and I put my profile up there for my show, I'll get 25 inquiries to be guests on my show, and it's all about them, all about them, all about them. Most of them don't even spell my name right. They've not listened to the show. They have no clue what the show is even topic is. Like, it's brutal. So if you can do those 4 things, you're like miles ahead of everybody else out there. It's just slapping together, cut and pasting, copy and pasting. And obviously, and also too, when you copy and paste email to email, you can see it throws a different color. So just FYI out there, anyone who's doing that speeder emailing.
And the other thing too is, don't shortchange the time you take. I love that you said that, because you spend all this time together to put together a good pitch. Make sure there are no typos. Make sure you have the right host and you're not typoing their name, and be relevant so you don't end up on their naughty list.
Yeah, exactly. You want, and that's why we suggest going to do those few things first, because then you're on their radar already. And chances are, it depends on the type of show, but your chances are it's their assistant that's seeing those things, not necessarily the host. So it's, once you're in with the assistant, that's always a good thing, right? Because the assistant will notice that you've said those things that are really relevant and important to them. Makes their job easier too.
Well, that's such a good point. You want to be like the perfect, easiest guest.
Yeah, and then you want to promote the heck out of the show afterwards, so they're very happy with you.
Excellent. And so what didn't I ask you about podcasting? I'm sure a ton, but anything else stand out? And then we're going to give people a podcasting goal. I think we should give 2, one for people who want to host and one for people. No, we need 3. Yeah, because, we have to. So what kernel do you have? And then I think we should give 1 goal for people who want a podcast, 1 goal for people to amp up their podcast, and 1 goal for people who want to be on podcasts.
All right. Good? Let's do it. Yep, let's do it.
Okay.
So last piece of advice.
Well, second to last, because I'm going to ask you to say something at the end, of course, because I'm me.
Okay, so I would say, really think about podcasting. Think about podcasting before you start. Really think about it. There's a lot of strategy that goes into a show right from the get-go that if you don't know or understand, then you can totally waste a lot of time. So we have this, and this comes from a lot of clients that a year or 2 into their show, they come back to us and say, my podcast is here, my business is here, they don't talk to each other. So my 1 bit of advice on that note is make sure people know how they can work with you if that's something they'd like to do beyond the show. And it sounds ridiculous that would be something that you forget, but even on my own show, I don't have very good calls to action as to how to work with me. So it is something that we get so wrapped up and excited about the show and the content that sometimes we forget to tell people. Literally, we may seed it throughout the show, but we may forget to actually tell them how to find out how to work with us.
That's great, because most of my audiences are writers, creatives, and entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of, consultancy in there. So I think the call to action is something people trip over because they think the call to action is to subscribe. And it is, but you also want to be able to connect with people. Oh, and Ken Troop says hello all. So hello, Ken, and thank you for watching. Okay, now back to the question. So you need to have the, I guess, primary and secondary calls to action as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say the primary ones, like you should be talking about it throughout the whole show, even bringing on, like if you're a coach, bring on clients and show them what you do. Our behind the mic interview is all about people who have launched their shows with us and so we get to tell their story, which is really great. Turns out to be a really good testimonial for us too. So thinking of creative ways that you can bring people in to your show and let them know how to work with you. And then also having a couple of calls to action without confusing people, but have a main place where they go. Like for us, it's our Podcasters Toolkit or my Podcast Coach Facebook group. So those are the two places to really connect with people and just be consistent with those.
So this is the link to Podcast Toolkit, which will also be in the recap. And this is the link to join the My Podcast Coach Facebook group, which is it's just fun. And if you're watching from my podcast Facebook group, hi, and thank you for tuning in today. And as I mentioned before, you can go to thedebmethod.com/blog tomorrow to read the recap and get the notes and get all of the links there as well. And if you need help with your goals, you can grab a copy of Your Goal Guide, a roadmap for setting, planning, and achieving your goals. It's yourgoalguidebook.com on Amazon or at your favorite bookstore. And you can learn more about me and my coaching at thedebmethod.com. So how did I do? Was that good?
Awesome. Perfect. Good calls to action. I like it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So now we need to give the bonus goals because, well, I said so. And people would say, Dad, you forgot the goals. They would be really concerned. So never forget the goals. What is a good goal? Let's go backwards. What is a good goal for someone who wants to be a podcast guest?
Yeah, for being a podcast guest, good goal would be number one, go and listen to 5 shows that you want to be on.
I love it.
And if you still want to be on them after you've listened, review their show, give them a review, subscribe, and then follow them on social media.
I love that you give extra details to your goals because you're just like me. This is why we are friends. Okay, so for podcast guest goal, go and listen to 5 shows that you want to be on. If you still like them, subscribe and review. Excellent. New podcaster goal. What is good for them?
Okay, so someone who is in the pre-launch stage of their show, a good goal would be to test your content. So spend 10 minutes on the clock and write down without stopping as many ideas for show content as you can.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love brainstorming. Perfect. Spend 10 minutes brainstorming. And then if you don't have enough content, you're like, okay, go back.
Yeah. Got to dig a little deeper. We say got to peel the onion back a little further. Once you hit that sweet spot, you can't stop talking about that content, and the content ideas are endless. So remember, you're trying to cast a larger net out there to bring people into your world. So yeah, just be flexible.
And for someone who has an established show, what is one thing that they can do to level up a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to challenge them to batch 4 episodes ahead this month, if they don't already.
Batch 4 episodes ahead of time. I will see your goal. Yes, that's the one I'm going to do because that's where my mode is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, and if they already do that, I can give them a secondary goal for a podcaster who's established is go to listennotes.com and find out what your listen score is on your show.
Wait, tell me more about this. It's a listen notes. Is there 1 N or 2?
Listen. So it's just listen and it's 2 words, listen notes, but together, no space, .com. Yeah.
And you get your listener rating?
Yeah, so what you can do is that they've given you a rating in the globe. So a lot of our shows are in the top 1% or 0.1% or 0.5% or top 10%, a global ranking. So that's based against all the 2.1 million shows that are out there. They're going to tell you what percentage your global rank is for your show. And oftentimes it's a lot higher than people think that their show, it's a lot better than their show. And it just gives you a good boost of confidence.
Oh, well, I'm all about the motivation behind it. So that sounds
Right.
perfect. And
Yeah.
I would imagine if you've done multiple episodes, your score is going to be good because you've been doing consistent,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so if you are watching and you have a podcast, please share it. Share the link in the comments because someone watching might want to be a guest. If you like to guest, please put a comment in the comments about your specialty because you never know. And join. And I guess the extra bonus goal is to join the podcasters group because it's fun. Because you can never know enough of your people.
That's right. Awesome people there only. I love it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michelle Elise Abraham, for joining us today, for spilling all these wonderful podcast secrets. Do you have one final thing you want to leave our watchers, listeners, viewers with?
Sure. Yeah. I'm just thinking we got to dig deep for this one. I've got so many good ones out there for you guys. I think that have fun with your podcast. I mean, this is your opportunity to get heard in the world. And if you feel like it's like you're not sure about your story or you're like you don't think anyone's going to listen, you don't have anything good to say, just remember that you're put on this earth because you have a story and you have a message to share with the world. And you don't know who is listening on the other end. If you change just that one person's life, I can't tell you how many of our podcasters get emails. I was about to commit suicide or I was about to do this and your podcast changed my life. So thank you. So just keep that in mind when you're out there to share your story and you've been put here on this earth to share a message and it's going to make an impact in someone's life. So that's your job.
Wow, that's amazing. So if for no other reason, that, because you never know who's listening and who you might be helping. I love it.
Right.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining me today. Thanks everyone for watching and soaking up all this great information. Again, I'm Debra Eckerling, author of your Goal Guide and founder of the DEB Method. And you can join me for the Goal Chat Twitter chat every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific. And I will be back next week and every Monday at 4 p.m. for another awesome Goal Chat Live. Go out there, podcast, and remember, you can do it.